are very site-specific, so this is going to be just a sort of general broad overview. So I want to start off by emphasizing that one risk management option or RMO is not better than another one. I think that there's a misconception that RMO1 is the best closure option, but if the criteria is met for RMO 1, 2, or 3, then the main objective is to mitigate any sort of risk. And if controls need to be implemented to mitigate that risk, then the ultimate goal is to make sure that human health and the environment are protected. So one RMO is not better than another one. 2 isn't better than 3. 1 isn't better than 2 and 3. I also want to mention that the RMO process is progressive. So you first compare your data that you've collected, your assessment data or your remedial data, and determine if you've met RMO 1. And if you haven't met the RMO 1 criteria, then you look at RMO 2. And if you haven't met the RMO 2 criteria, then you go into RMO 3. So briefly, and I'm going to get into these in a little bit more detail in subsequent slides, RMO 1 does not have any controls. RMO 2 usually closes with, it has institutional and or engineering controls in place, and the contamination is limited to the source property. And then RMO 3 closes with engineering and or institutional controls, and the contamination can extend beyond the property boundary. It also can be closed without controls if there's an alternative cleanup target level that's non-site specific. So for RMO 1, groundwater should not have any contaminants of concern above the groundwater cleanup target levels in Chapter 6278 or 777 Florida Administrative Code. Surface water and sediment impacts aren't present, and neither is free product. And the soil needs to meet contaminants of concern in soil need to meet the soil cleanup target levels in Chapter 62777 F.A.C. And the leachate concentrations should not be above the applicable groundwater cleanup target levels. For all of the risk management options for soil, there are different ways you can evaluate your soil data. You can either do discrete samples and compare those directly to the CTLs, or you can calculate a 95% UCL, upper confidence level, depending on what your exposure unit is, or you can also collect incremental sampling methodology samples. Composite samples are not acceptable for decision-making purposes, so composite samples are not considered appropriate for evaluating your closure criteria. Similarly, for leachability, you can also evaluate leachability using different methods. You can do direct testing, which is synthetic precipitation leaching procedure, or SPLP, or if you have a permeable surface that's been open for filtration for over 2 years, you can do groundwater sampling to demonstrate that you don't have a leachability problem, or you can do site-specific. You can calculate an alternative leachability CTL. So for risk management options 2 and 3, there are a lot of criteria that are similar for both of the closure options. Institutional and, if necessary, engineering controls can be implemented to mitigate the risk. Free product can be present in RMO 2 and 3 closures, but it needs to be demonstrated that the free product is either not technically feasible or cost-effective to remove, and the free product doesn't pose a risk. Unlike risk management option 1, the exposure units for RMO 2 and 3 can be greater than a quarter acre, but it needs to be demonstrated that adequate samples were collected in order to make that evaluation. And this can also result in an institutional control that means that you can't subdivide the property for the exposure unit that you've evaluated. And alternative soil cleanup target levels can be established. Some of the main differences between RMO 2 and 3 include risk management 2 options. The impacts are limited to within the source property, so they don't go beyond the source property boundaries. And the impacts are less than a quarter acre in size. And then, as shown on this slide here, for risk management 3, no controls are necessary if an alternative cleanup target level is based on non-site specific exposure factors. So for example, if intrinsic toxicity values have been updated since the promulgation of the Chapter 62777 F.A.C. CTLs have come have been published, you may propose an alternative CTL that's still protective. It's just based on new science, and so you don't have to have a control for that, but it would still get registered with the Institutional Control Registry. Noticing is required, even for non-recorded institutional controls, which were discussed previously. And again, any sort of alternative CTL or conditional closure needs to be listed in the Institutional Control Registry. So that was a very fast, brief overview of the risk management options. I didn't want to get into too many details because, especially with conditional closures, they are very site-specific. Like I said, it's a progressive process. You may meet some requirements in RMO 2, but then maybe you need to get kicked into RMO 3. So it's a very site-specific process to evaluate the criteria for closure. My contact information is available here. Don't forget the J. It's leah.j.smith@floridadep.gov. And my phone number is 850-245-8717. Our group, the District Support Program, is a highly technical group, so feel free to reach out if you have technical questions or questions regarding how to get to closure. It's better to evaluate your path to closure earlier. Your conceptual site model will change as you get additional data, but if you have an end goal, it really helps to evaluate your closure options earlier than later. Like James said, you don't want to get to the end and then abandon your wells and end up having to do more work. Thank you.